Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's right. Be careful. Like it says in Pirkei Avot, be careful. Be careful. We're going to get to a Mishnah like that, actually. That everything is on the record. So we're at the end of Mishnah Chet, the eighth Mishnah in the first Perek, and just maybe for a minute or two, if anybody has anything to add, we have Yehuda ben Tabai saying this is the way you should view the people that come, the litigants that come before you for judgment. In the Hebrew, the last phrase, it's not necessarily in the way it's translated. The phrases get put in different places when you write English, but in the Hebrew, kishekiblu alayim et hadin, when they accepted upon themselves the judgment. So the idea being here that he doesn't just say, oh, and when they leave, then everything is clear and everything is fine, and now you should look at both of them with fresh eyes, and the page is turned, and whatever arguments there were, let bygones be bygones, and let's start a new story with everybody. That would be understandable. That would make perfect sense as a teaching in the Hebrew. But the added phrase is when they accepted the judgment upon themselves. So does anybody want to share any thoughts about what that might mean?
That the let bygones be bygones has to be all the way around.
Yeah, I think so. I think that that's part of the question. You can have judgment rendered, and as we see in our own situation politically today, a judgment can be rendered, but then the question is, do people accept it? And if people accept it, then it's possible to move on. But when the judgment stands simply because there's the power of the state or the power of the court to enforce it, but it's actually being in some way coerced upon the people that have brought their case, and they don't really accept it per se, it's a recipe for ongoing trouble. It's a recipe for ongoing discord. And the question is, how does the judge view a person who will not accept their judgment? Right? What if a person refuses to accept that the judgment that the shofet, that the magistrate has delivered, is the best judgment right now that we can have, and that's all there is to it. So you take a deep breath. You're disappointed. Maybe you're a little upset, but you go, okay, I accept that this is the judgment. But that's pretty important for the sense of peace that you want eventually for all of this system to help create, right? It's otherwise, as Hobbes would say, everybody's just going to destroy everybody when they get the opportunity. There has to be some willingness to step back and say, well, for the sake of peace, I'm going to have to accept this judgment. And as I say, just as an editorial comment, but I'm only reporting the facts here. I'm not saying anything that people don't know if they want to. We are living now in an environment in the United States where that value is becoming questionable, and there are these kind of like winking or innuendo-ish kind of threats that are being issued by some people, that if things don't go their way, then they're not going to accept it. Bush v. Gore was, in the eyes of many people, to be honest, in my eyes, and we found out subsequent historical information to confirm it, it was a political travesty. It wasn't an act of rendering justice. It was a vote that came purely out of political motives. Sandra Day O'Connor admitted it. and we are suffered 20 years of disaster as a result. And now the question is, what's going to happen? Is the acceptance of judgment going to be possible? And that's going to be, unfortunately, even, look, we have a judicial system now that doesn't line up with my values. I'm not, at the moment, leading an armed rebellion against the Supreme Court. So this is a very, very tricky, sensitive question. All right. That's as much as I wanted to bring up about that. And in fact, that leads into the next thing that I wanted to bring up. He has a partner, right? We're in the Zugot, the partners, the couples, so to speak, of joint leadership of the Jewish community that was early on in the proto-rabbinic period. None of these people have the name rabbi in front of them because there is no title rabbi as a conventional title for a class of religious leaders yet. We're in the pre-Common Era period, and Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach are in the beginning of the 1st century BCE, right? The first half or even the first third of BCE. So we're talking about like 70 or 80 BCE, and they were the leaders of a group that actually was contending for the hearts and minds of the Jewish people. All kinds of names could be used for them, and none of them are adequate for everybody because there are actually all kinds of people, coalitions of alliances. But the easiest term to use is the Prushim, the Pharisees. And the main group that was aligned against the Pharisees were the Sadducees, the Tzdukim. And the Sadducees were a very powerful class within the Jewish community at the time, and they had privilege and money, and they also had institutional status because they were very much the party of the priests. The priests were mostly aligned, not all, but mostly aligned with the anti-Pharisee group. So this was a contentious time, and we have a famous story, for instance, that we'll get to. The Hasmonean king at the time of Shimon ben Shetach and Yehuda ben Tabai was Alexander Yanai, Alexander Jannaeus, Alexander Yanai. And he was a Hasmonean, which means he was a priest. And the Hasmoneans took both the priesthood and the kingship as their power base, much to the dismay of the scholarly, proto-rabbinic class. And Alexander Yanai became a card-carrying Sadducee. So, and he was very much into pomp and circumstance and making sure that his public appearances were the most successful and the most well-attended public appearances that ever happened before or since. And the story is that he decided to officiate as high priest in the temple on Sukkot. And there was a contentious debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees about whether or not Sukkot should have a special libation of water as a way of praying for rain. So we pray for rain on Sukkot. We change our liturgy, our prayer book phraseology. At the end of Sukkot, we go Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagashem. You bring the rain, the wind and the rain. So the pre-rabbinic tradition upholders said it's an ancient tradition. We pour water at the altar as a way of praying to God for a good year of rain. The Sadducee says, show me in the Bible where it says that. It never says it anywhere in the Bible, which is true. This was the fight about the oral Torah. Is there an oral Torah that is authoritative, or no? I'm simplifying things to a great degree. We don't have time for the whole business. We've talked about it many other times. So anyway, Alexander Yanai was the priest officiating that day, and he took the water. It was handed to him, the pitcher of water that he was supposed to pour on the altar, on the side of the altar, and he poured it on his feet to show his contempt for this ritual. And the story, it's in Josephus, it's in the Talmud. The story is that he was stoned by the populace, by their etrogim. Everybody that had a lulav and etrog, they took their etrogim and they stoned him to express their protest and their anger that he wasn't respecting this tradition. So of course it's a Pharisaic story. I don't know if Alexander Yanai would have told the same story. And the story goes that the altar itself was chipped and was made unusable for the service. So it was a tragedy that was highlighting the kind of fights that were going on, the partisanship that was happening. So this is by way of introduction to a story that's told about Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach. They were the joint leaders, and Yehuda ben Tabai apparently was the main judge for a while. And he, at one point, the story is told that he said that he was bragging that he showed those Sadducees, because there was another fight between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. There's a rule about witnesses, that witnesses that are corrupt witnesses that are trying to frame somebody, they need to be punished. They must be punished by the punishment that they try to inflict on somebody else. So for instance, if there are false witnesses that try to convict somebody of murder, and the person did not commit the murder, but they collude to offer testimony that will convict this guy of murder, and then they are caught in their collusion, and we find out that they are false witnesses. So the Torah says these are called Edim Zomimim, plotting, conspiratorial witnesses, and they have to be punished with the same punishment that they try to inflict on the other person. So the Pharisees say that means that thank God we caught them in time, that the innocent blood was not shed, and then they need to be condemned to death. Or if it's paying money, or if it's doing something that you get lashes for, whatever the punishment was that they wanted the other person to be convicted of, they get the punishment. The Sadducees said, no, the only time you give them the death penalty is if they actually succeeded in killing the first person. But if they didn't succeed, if you caught it in time, they don't get it. Then it's attempted murder, and you don't kill them. So Yehuda ben Tabai said that I'm so proud of myself that I caught a plotting witness, and I executed him just to show before the other person got executed. And I wanted to make the point that the Sadducees are totally wrong and that this is the law. So Shimon ben Shetach said, I'm sorry, but in your zeal to uphold our party's position, you stumbled, because you can't convict one witness as being a conspiratorial witness. There have to be two witnesses. And this was only one witness that you caught. So therefore, that one witness could never have actually succeeded in getting the other person convicted. So you have innocent blood on your hands. Okay, so this is Shimon ben Shetach's very, very much of a straight shooter, so to speak, where he's not using his political antipathy. He hated the Sadducees. He fought against the Sadducees. But he nevertheless insisted on applying the law correctly. And he told his colleague that he had made a gross error and taken the life of somebody who actually was a real lowlife and trying to kill somebody else. But he didn't do it according to the rule of law. At that point, Yehuda ben Tabai said, okay, I am no longer going to be the head of the court. I will never do judgment unless Shimon ben Shetach is with me. He said, from now on, I've learned my lesson, and he bowed his and accepted Shimon ben Shetach's authority as the greater authority. So here we have, that's all by way of a long introduction to the next Mishnah, which is Mishnah 9, where we have Shimon ben Shetach himself. One more interesting little tidbit about Shimon ben Shetach. He was Salome Alexandra's brother. Salome Alexandra was Shlom Tzion Hamalka, Salome the queen, wife of Alexander Yanai, the guy who got hit on the head with the esrogim. So he, Shimon ben Shetach, was the leader of the Pharisees. His sister was the queen, married to the head of the Sadducees. Right? And the internal goings on between what was happening between Salome and her husband is a whole other historical story of interest. And when Alexander Yanai finally dies, Salome, who was protecting the Pharisees, reinstated the Pharisees as the ruling party, so to speak, but not when her husband was still around. So it gets very, very complicated. It gets the intrigues and the strife and the pressures were enormous at that time. So here comes Shimon ben. Oh, and just one more thing. That's not the famous Salome with the 7 veils. That's, I think, her daughter, or some. Salome, the famous Salome, is in the next generation. She is the wife of Herod, and that's later on. Okay. So now, Shimon ben Shetach. Okay, anybody else have another digression? No? Okay, here we go. Lou, what do you think? You got a digression? Okay, Shimon ben Shetach. Who's going to read for us? Okay, Bill, go.
This again is from Rabbi Shapiro's translation.
Good, so some of us have a different one, and that's always good for comparison. Go ahead.
Shimon ben Shetach teaches, question matters deeply, and be careful with your phrasing, lest you reveal your bias and hear only what you want to hear, rather than what is true.
Okay, so this is a very free translation. If anybody else has a different translation, you'll see how very, very, what can I say, spun that translation is. And I don't know, I hope he has a little note about how much liberty he took on that translation.
He never says anything about the quality or the nature of the translation.
Right.
The notes are substantive about whatever the subject is.
So I mean, I'd certainly understand what he's trying to do, and there's plenty to discuss from what he said that relates to what Shimon ben Shetach said, but it's not what Shimon ben Shetach said. So Sarita, you unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah. Shimon the son of Shetach said, "Be very searching in the examination of witnesses, and be heedful of thy words, lest through them they learn to falsify." Okay,
so the idea of the witnesses is mentioned explicitly in Shimon ben Shetach's statement in the first of his 3 phrases, right? Again, it's a 3-phrase statement. We have that again and again and again. Got that 3 times? That's what the Rami Shapiro takes out, which is I think fine if you wanted to then expand on Shimon ben Shetach, but at least be true to what he's talking about, because the reason I gave all that background is because this is a contentious problem. These are judges who are in the public eye, and the partisanship regarding administration of justice, as I just told you from the Yehuda ben Tabai story, is an extreme pressure on everyone. And so if there is something for us to learn, as Rami Shapiro suggests, let's at least learn it from the context and then expand outward, right? This is a man who fought very hard to hold on to a sense of integrity in the law wherever it might go, right? And so he says, therefore, in the Hebrew, be one who investigate exceedingly the witnesses that you have, right? Keep on investigating those witnesses, right? Keep on asking questions, keep on looking into what they're saying, keep on weighing whether they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, or whether what they're saying actually stands up to the standards of what we require testimony to be, because after all, somebody else's fate is hinging on these witnesses, right? In the Jewish system of law, we're not talking. There's no circumstantial evidence per se that you can use against people. It's all about the witnesses telling the truth. So everything, it depends on how we hear those witnesses.
So there's a commentary here
Go ahead.
in this translation as well for the be very searching.
Okay.
It says, this maxim was probably the fruit of a tragic experience. His son was executed upon a charge, which when too late was proved to have been groundless. Closer examination of the witnesses would have revealed the falsity of their evidence.
Right. So this is, and he also was accused of all kinds of bending the rules. There's a lot, like, as I say, all of these episodes and stories are talking about how excruciatingly difficult this job of judgment really is. So yeah, and it even hit home in terms of his own family, not just what I was talking about, but as you say, with his son. Now, but if you want to be cynical, then what you could say is, oh, see, when his son was executed, all of a sudden now he wants to be careful. What I was trying to present was that he was careful even against, he was trying to be careful even when it wasn't in his own interest to insist on being careful. There's a story that he ran after somebody who looked like they were with a knife, who was trying to attack somebody. They ran into a cave. The person who was running away, fleeing from this person with the knife, and then the person with the knife comes out, and he's full of blood, and his knife is full of blood, and the other guy is in the cave dead. And Shimon Mechetach saw this and said, I can't do a thing because I don't have witnesses. I don't have witnesses to convict you. I know what you did, and I can't do it. So, so all of this is part of the package here. So then he says, and this is where it's two different phrases. Like I said, there's three phrases: 1, 2, 3. But the two last phrases actually act as a counter to the first phrase. Right? He says you're going to really keep on investigating those witnesses, but then he says, but be careful as you investigate so that they can't figure out what you're looking for, so that they can't figure out what exactly is your suspicion. Because if they can figure out what you're after, they can then learn to lie. They can then figure out how to tailor their answers to get you to believe them. So you have to tiptoe around this whole interrogation and really be super, super, super careful. Okay, so this is how it stands. I think there was a movie, Q&A. I think if anybody ever saw it, with the guy that not too long ago, he's a great actor, but he got into a lot of trouble in terms of sexual harassment, and now he's like persona non grata as far as I know. A guy, what's his name? I forgot what his name is. Anyway, the movie was about a criminal who is caught for interrogation, and I think it's called Q&A. And the whole movie is about his answers, playing out his answers to the questions, so that he keeps telling stories about what happened here, what happened there, what happened here, what happened there. and he answers. He's able to answer all of the questions, and he spins this amazing set of plausible stories that are alibis for him, and he ends up walking out. And then to give away the story, it's still worth watching. To give away the story, afterwards, after the guy is released, the interrogator looks behind him, and he sees all the flyers that are on the bulletin board in his office. And then he realizes that every single flyer became the hook of a story so that, it sounded like this could be, it's too true. He couldn't make this stuff up. How could he make all this stuff up?
Yeah, the movie was The Usual Suspects with Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey, that's the guy. So it wasn't Q&A. Thank you.
I think there was a movie Q&A with Anthony Hopkins where he's a lawyer and he's trying to plot the perfect crime, and he goes through, he imagines himself on a witness stand, and so that he can make the perfect thing.
Okay, so this one was called The Perfect Suspect.
The Usual Suspect.
Usual Suspect. Okay, so anyway, but that's it. So you gotta admit, right, Craig? It was a pretty cool movie, right? It was an amazing performance.
Seriously, it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
That's why I mentioned it.
There you go.
So who bet I couldn't get the right title? So anyway, so Shema Yilmedu L'Shaker. Now let's go back. We have 1 minute because I need to get out of, unfortunately, out of this meeting so that I can do the other thing, and then I want to go to David Halpfinger's thing on time. Everybody's invited. Everybody's invited to the rest of the splash. Bill, can you read Rami Shapiro's more generalizing, right? If we're not going to be high court magistrates, does this Mishnah have any meaning to us? So go ahead.
That's what it says. Shimon ben Shatak, he has a slightly different spelling of the name. Shimon ben Shatak teaches, question matters deeply, and be careful with your phrasing, lest you reveal your bias and hear only what you want to hear rather than what is true.
Okay, so
that's really quite different from what the Hebrew says. He's really interpolating an awful lot.
I think though that if we spend some time, maybe next time, we could see how much it's connected to what we have here, but then bringing it home to each and every one of us, but turning the tables to a certain extent. So I look forward to studying that with you next time. And lehitraot. Okay.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody.
Stay safe, everybody.
Good week.